You confronted your shadow, did the necessary inner work, and healed old wounds. Yet now you feel an unexpected emptiness, no drive, no inspiration, no motivation. Most troubling is your inability to explain why. Logically, you should feel better, but instead, you wonder if something inside you has broken. What if this isn't failure at all? What if this quietness signals that your soul has stopped performing on demand? This is a truth about shadow work that is rarely discussed, something Carl Jung understood, but seldom expressed directly. After unearthing the contents of your unconscious, bringing hidden shame, unmet needs, and childhood injuries to the surface, you don't just feel improved. You feel profoundly and unsettlingly different. Jung once said, "The collapse of the persona is often mistaken for depression." He recognized what much of modern psychology overlooks: when you've engaged deeply with your shadow and integrated those rejected aspects of yourself, your old motivational system doesn't simply change, it dissolves. And this dissolution is not illness, it is transformation. Have you ever healed deeply, expected to feel lighter, but instead found yourself in a strange emptiness? Comment 1. If you felt this quiet void after inner work. Comment 2. If you still believe healing should instantly bring motivation. For years, perhaps decades, your drive came from unconscious forces: the desire to be loved, the fear of being left behind, the compulsion to prove your value, and the dread of not being enough. These were never deliberate decisions. They were survival strategies operating silently in the background, propelling you, keeping you active and productive. Shadow work doesn't merely mend these wounds, it reveals the whole underlying system. Suddenly, you see how much of your life has been propelled by fear, disguised as ambition, and how much pursuit of pleasure was really just avoidance of pain. When that system breaks down, when those hidden drivers cease to function, you don't just lose energy, you lose the very reasons you were ever driven. Jung described this as the essential dissolution that must occur before rebirth. Yet no one warns you about the stillness between the person you were and the person you are becoming. Let me share Sarah's story. Though her name is changed, her experience is real. Following a painful breakup that exposed deep-rooted patterns from childhood, she spent 2 years in intensive therapy, EMDR, inner child healing parts work, and shadow integration. She faced every hidden wound. By the end, she was truly healed. The lifelong anxiety that once drove her vanished. The compulsion to please dissolved, and the fear of solitude transformed into a sense of genuine self-companionship. Yet when she returned to her marketing career, something felt off, not bad, just empty. Campaigns that once thrilled her now seemed meaningless. Client meetings that once left her energized now felt hollow. Promotions she had pursued for years suddenly looked like elaborate diversions from an unnameable truth. "I used to wake up every morning with a fire in my belly," she said. Even if it was fueled by anxiety or fear, it was still fuel. Now I wake up and feel nothing, like I'm waiting for instructions from a voice that's gone silent. This is what Jung referred to as the negredo stage in psychological alchemy. The essential darkness, the void, the breaking down that must occur before renewal can happen. In medieval alchemy, negredo symbolized blackening the death of an old form as a prerequisite for transformation. What confuses many in our culture is the belief that healing should feel pleasant, progress should be straightforward, and growth should be easy to measure. We expect shadow work to function like medicine. You feel unwell. You take a pill and you recover. But in reality, it's more akin to surgery. The operation may succeed, yet the healing process is long unusual and nothing like you imagined. In this phase, you may find yourself indifferent to things that once felt essential. Career ambitions that used to seem crucial now appear meaningless. Relationships that once thrilled you might feel staged. Hobbies that previously sparked joy can feel contrived. This is not clinical depression. You are not hopeless, worthless, or incapable of functioning. Instead, you're simply no longer driven by your former motivations. Without the familiar carrots and sticks that once guided you, moving forward feels uncertain. Jung saw this as a sign that your psyche is undergoing a deep reorganization. The ego, the part of you that perceives itself as separate, is no longer in control. Yet your deeper, authentic self has not fully emerged. You are in a transitional space, a liminal zone, a void between your old way of being and your future self. Take a moment to breathe. Is this the feeling you've been carrying, the belief that you should be more motivated, driven, or alive than you are? In reality, your psyche is safeguarding you from regressing. It's blocking you from returning to motivations that were never truly yours, while still withholding what will inspire you next. This is not laziness, failure, or stagnation. It is your soul granting itself a sacred pause before the next stage of your evolution. This pause isn't stagnation. It's your soul taking a breath, reorganizing everything inside you. Comment 1 if you've learned to appreciate this slowing down phase. Comment 2 if you usually get uneasy when life moves at a slower pace. In many traditional cultures, this void was revered as an essential stage in spiritual growth, seen in practices like vision quests, dark nights of the soul, and initiation rituals. Such traditions acknowledge that genuine growth often demands a phase of dissolution, uncertainty, and emptiness. By contrast, our modern society tends to pathologize stillness, medicate away mystery, and attempt to fix what may not be broken at all. Jung cautioned that bypassing this stage, rushing into action before transformation is complete, risks reconstructing life on the same old foundations. Outwardly, we may seem changed, yet inwardly, we may still operate under the same unconscious patterns that led us to shadow work in the first place. Here's the truth that reframes it all. The silence is not collapse. It is a sacred pause before transformation. All the motivations you once held that stemmed from fear, societal pressure, proving yourself, or avoiding pain have vanished, not due to damage, but because you've outgrown them. Your soul is actively refusing to act under those old terms. Jung expressed it best. You are not failing. You are in between. Reflect honestly on what motivation once meant to you. How much of it was rooted in trying to earn love? How much in the fear of inadequacy? How much was essentially refined anxiety, masquerading as productivity? When you engage deeply in shadow work and integrate those hidden patterns, you do more than heal old wounds. You abandon the belief that your worth is tied to performance, that love must be earned, or that value only comes through output. When those beliefs fade, the motivation they fueled fades as well. This is what Jung meant by the death of the persona. The persona is the mask we adopt to function in society, the role we play to fulfill our needs. But it is not our true self. It is the version we believe we must be to survive. Shadow work dismantles this mask, revealing the gap between your authentic self and the one you've been performing. Once that difference becomes visible, it cannot be unseen. The difficulty lies in the fact that much of your life, career, relationships, ambitions, and even your sense of purpose was constructed to serve and sustain that performed self, which you now realize is at best incomplete and at worst false. So what occurs when that constructed self dies? But your true identity has yet to fully surface. You feel unmotivated because genuine motivation can only arise from truth, and that truth is still unfolding. Consider David's story. He was a successful architect who spent 3 years confronting childhood trauma and attachment issues. The healing was profound. He felt a deeper peace than ever before. But upon returning to work, designing buildings, managing projects, climbing the corporate ladder, he felt as if he were wearing ill-fitting clothes, not exactly uncomfortable, just wrong, as though he were acting in a play he no longer believed in. I used to be so driven, he said. I'd work 60-hour weeks and love it. I had 5-year plans and 10-year goals. I knew precisely what I wanted and how to get it. Now, looking at those same goals, I feel nothing as if they belong to someone else. David assumed he was depressed. He visited his doctor, considered medication, and questioned whether more therapy was needed. Yet what he faced was not depression. It was the natural outcome of deep internal transformation. His old motivations proving worth through achievement, earning his father's approval via success, and evading the shame of failure were gone. Shadow work had healed those wounds, integrated those unmet needs, and resolved those fears. But the motivations rooted in his authentic self, rather than his wounded ego, had not yet appeared. This is the threshold Jung described, the point where you understand that genuine, enduring motivation does not arise from compulsion, but from truth. Fear can be an extraordinarily powerful fuel, enabling you to wake at 5 a.m., work until midnight, and accomplish feats you thought impossible. Yet, fear-driven motivation has a shelf life. Eventually, you either burn out or heal enough to no longer be afraid. When fear ceases to propel you, and nothing has yet replaced it, till you feel empty. That emptiness is not the issue. It is the remedy. Sometimes emptiness is the medicine. It clears out old noise so you can hear your true calling. Comment 1 if you see the quiet as a gift. Comment 2 if you still want to escape it as quickly as possible. It is your psyche making room for something new to take root. If this resonates, keep reading. This part may feel like looking into a mirror. Jung believed that your true self, the deeper and more authentic core of who you are, does not shout for attention. It doesn't demand dramatize or manufacture crises. Instead, it whispers, nudges, and invites. But when life is saturated with noise, external pressures, and internal fears, you cannot hear those whispers or sense that invitation. This is why the void is sacred. why silence is essential, and why the loss of old motivation is not failure, it is preparation. Your soul is crafting the space for you to finally hear what it has always been trying to tell you. Here's what is rarely explained about the far side of this void, what unfolds when you stop resisting the silence and begin listening to its lessons. When fresh motivation arises, it feels entirely different. It's not marked by anxiety or urgency, nor is it fueled by deficiency, a need to prove something, or fear of loss. Instead, it is calm, consistent, and certain. It resembles the contrast between artificial light and sunlight. Both allow vision, but only one nourishes. Jung referred to this as the emergence of the self capital S, not the ego self that seeks validation, craves external approval, and engages in constant comparison, competition, and calculation. But the deeper self, already whole, sufficient, and connected to something greater than personal survival. When the self drives your motivation, you no longer hustle, you respond. Opportunities are not chased frantically, but acknowledged with the assurance of belonging. Passion is not forced, as if reviving something dead. Instead, you follow curiosity as though tracing a thread toward a worthwhile destination. Creation doesn't arise from emptiness or the need to fill a void, but from fullness and inner aliveness that demands expression. Here's how this manifested for David, the architect I mentioned before. After nearly a year of low motivation, deep questioning, and fears that therapy had somehow damaged him, a change occurred. It was neither dramatic nor instantaneous, no light switch moment or sudden revelation. It resembled a sunrise, so gradual that its progression was almost unnoticed, until suddenly everything was illuminated, and the darkness seemed a distant memory. He began taking long walks without his phone, not for exercise, not as a productivity tactic, and not as a networking opportunity. He walked simply to walk, moved purely for the sake of movement, and spent time outdoors solely to be outside, free from agendas, goals, or measures of success and failure. On one of these walks, he spotted an old, long abandoned building, something he had passed countless times without truly noticing. That day, however, its framework, potential melancholy, and quiet dignity resonated with him in a way nothing had for months. Rather than dismissing the sensation, monetizing it, or overanalyzing his attraction to decay and abandonment, he simply allowed himself to sit with it. He began making regular visits to the building, sketching not formal plans or renovation blueprints, but impressions, capturing what it felt like, what it might become, and the story it seemed to hold. This was not driven by career advancement, financial gain, portfolio building, or a need to impress. It was guided instead by curiosity, beauty, and an unexplainable sense of rightness that required no justification. Simply put, the building seemed to have something to communicate, and he had developed the capacity to hear it. For weeks he sat and remained present with this overlooked structure. Gradually and gently, without force or urgency, an idea emerged. It wasn't a business plan or strategic project, but a vision, a possibility, a what if that felt more authentic than anything he had worked on in years. His curiosity eventually led to discussions with the building's owner, which opened the door to further conversations. These culminated in a distinctive restoration project, unlike any he had undertaken, one that respected the building's history while making space for new life, involved the community in surprising ways, and felt more like a collaboration with the building's essence than an imposition of his own vision. This project ultimately steered his career toward a direction aligned with who he was becoming, rather than who he once was. The essential insight is this: none of it would have happened had he attempted to reignite his old motivation. Forcing productivity, ignoring the silence, and reverting to former work habits would have made him miss that subtle whisper entirely. He might have driven past that building for another decade without noticing it continued creating visually impressive, yet emotionally hollow spaces, and remained outwardly successful, but inwardly starved and purposeless. The self does not roar, it hums. It doesn't clamor for attention, but extends quiet invitations. It doesn't foster urgency, but evokes resonance. Once you learn to hear that subtle hum and trust its gentle direction, once you can discern between ego-driven ambition and the pull of the self-motivation shifts from battling resistance to following resonance. You write out of a genuine desire to share, not to gain views validation or proof of intelligence. You create because beauty flows through you, not to be perceived as creative. You love because connection is inherent to your nature, not from fear of loneliness. You work because the work itself calls to you, not to validate your worth through productivity. This is the essence of Jung's idea of living symbolically, not indulging in fantasy delusion or spiritual avoidance, but living with conscious awareness of deeper patterns, meaningful coincidences, and synchronicities that illuminate how your personal narrative is woven into the greater story of existence, and how your healing serves a purpose beyond your own comfort. When the self, rather than the ego, drives you, work transforms into devotion instead of obligation. Relationships become a matter of conscious choice, not unconscious need. Creativity becomes an act of expression, not performance. Rest is understood as nourishment rather than idleness. Boundaries are recognized as self-care, not selfishness. Here's the surprising paradox. Your past self might not believe this softer form of motivation often achieves more than the previous frantic energy because it is sustainable. It aligns with who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. It emerges from fullness, not emptiness, from love, not fear, from truth, not compulsion. I have a simple journaling prompt that may help you distinguish between ego-based and self-based motivation in your life. It can guide you in recognizing which inner voice is influencing you, whether you feel compelled to act or not. Begin by writing down 3 things you believe you should currently feel motivated about, things you think you ought to desire, pursue, or care for. Then ask, where does this should originate? Whose voice is influencing this? Who would feel disappointed if I stopped caring about it? What fears arise if I release it? What am I trying to prove by pursuing it? Next, list 3 things that attract you, even if they seem illogical. These might spark curiosity, wonder, peace, or a sense of aliveness and presence. Then, ask, How would it feel to follow this pull without needing justification? How would it feel to trust this attraction without requiring full understanding? The contrast between these two lists may reveal the gap between fear-based and truth-based motivation, between the exhausting push of the wounded ego and the nourishing pull of the authentic self. Sarah, whom I mentioned earlier, realized through this process that her fear-driven motivation in marketing was masking a profound desire to work with children. This wasn't because she believed she should, or because it would enhance her image, solve her problems, or validate her worth. It was simply because being around children awakened something within her, something long buried beneath years of trying to fit an imposed identity. Over 2 years, she transitioned from a marketing executive to an elementary school teacher. 2 years spent following curiosity instead of demanding clarity, trusting the process instead of forcing outcomes, and taking small steps toward authenticity rather than large strides toward appearances. Friends considered her decision irrational, and her family feared the financial consequences. Even her rational mind produced countless objections, but for the first time in decades, her soul was alive with joy. Here's the takeaway. You haven't lost motivation. You've simply outgrown the reasons that once propelled you. This isn't settling or accepting less. It's advancing to a richer level of existence. This is your psyche refusing to let you trade authenticity for mere performance. The silence you feared is where your true self has been waiting to speak. The emptiness you've tried to fill is actually space being prepared for something more genuine, enduring, and authentically yours than anything you've known before. Jung never claimed this path would be easy. He didn't promise individuation. The process of becoming your true self would be comfortable, fast, or straightforward. He understood it meant journeying through the valley of uncertainty, the desert of emotional emptiness, and the void of doubt. But he also knew that beyond that desert lies an oasis, not a mirage. You may have been chasing the perfect life-job relationship or version of yourself, but what waits there is something real, something that need not be perfect, because it is true. Motivation, arising from this place, doesn't cause burnout because it stems from abundance, not deficiency. It doesn't leave you empty because it gives as much as it takes. It doesn't vanish with changing circumstances because it's grounded in who you are, not in what you desire. If you find yourself in the void now, unmotivated and questioning what's wrong, consider this. Perhaps nothing is wrong at all. Perhaps something profoundly right is occurring. Maybe your soul has grown strong enough to stop performing, your psyche integrated enough to distinguish genuine desire from inherited duty, and you're healing deep enough to wait for true inspiration instead of fueling yourself with artificial urgency. Listen to the silence, not with your ears, but with your heart. Ask yourself, what message has it been holding for you? What has it been shielding you from? What has it been getting you ready to face? Your old life, the one propelled by fear need, and an unending craving for external validation is over. You consciously ended it by doing the inner work and confronting your shadow, ensuring you would never have to live that way again. This is not the conclusion of your healing. It is the beginning of your authentic life. This is where your true adventure begins. The self you are becoming does not require motivation in the traditional sense. It requires recognition, trust, and your willingness to stop striving to become someone else and instead notice who you already are. You are not lagging behind, broken, or failing. You are precisely where you need to be for the next stage of your becoming to unfold. When that next phase begins, when the soft hum of authentic motivation surfaces, you will understand why the silence was essential. You will see why the void had to be cleared before it could be filled with something genuine. You will come to see that losing your former motivation was not a problem needing resolution. It was a gift. The gift of finally being free to uncover your true purpose. If this message touched something deep within you or helped you identify your current experience, I invite you to share in the comments. Your story, your passage through the void, might be exactly what another person needs to hear to feel less alone. If you wish to keep exploring the deeper movements of psychology and the soul, if you feel drawn to uncovering the hidden patterns that shape our inner lives, subscribe, because our conversation on what it truly means to become ourselves is only just beginning. The void is not the conclusion of your story. It is the pause between the life you have lived and the life you are meant to live. And that life is worth waiting for. You might still be in the pause, or you might have stepped into a new chapter. Both are part of the journey. Comment 1 if you feel you're still waiting for something new. Comment 2 if you're now living with renewed authentic motivation.